Hello, welcome to Coding on Crack, where today we are looking at AI and the future of software development. This is lesson 2. I talked about AI and the future of software development in another episode, which you can go and watch on my channel. Today we are looking at the AI accelerated developer. I want to talk about what does it mean to use AI as a developer in this era of AI development. What are the pitfalls? What do you actually need to learn or know to be successful? How much knowledge is unnecessary? How much knowledge is necessary? All of these things. So let's hop right into it and start looking at the difference between programmers and developers. This difference is important to understand because if you know the difference between programmers and developers, you'll know which skills you actually need to learn and which skills are actually going to be monetizable. This is important because we kind of discussed this in the last video. AI, and many people have been saying this, AI is taking on the role of programmers, right? It's taking on the role of software or code writers, whereas software engineers, software architects, developers, as I'm calling them, are not necessarily being taken over by AI. AI is not doing that job well. It's just serving as a useful tool for developers. You can also kind of think about it as like the junior developer role versus the senior developer role. That senior developer role still exists, but that junior developer role is going away because instead of hiring human junior developers, senior developers are just using AI to do all of those tasks. Now you might say like, oh shit, do I need to become a junior developer before I can become like a senior developer? And if AI is doing that, then am I not fucked? Kind of, but honestly not really. With the right skills, you can jump straight into being a system architect, being a lead developer. And so let's look at the difference. All right, programmers. What the hell do programmers do? Programmers focus on writing code and implementing specific functions. Obviously, we don't need to do this shit no more. You pull up to ChatGPT, you say, dude, I need an implementation of depth-first search in this context, and then you feed it your information, and then it'll pump out that function for you. Developers focus on designing solutions to user and business needs. The developer is the person who says, like, why did I choose to create an instance or a function using depth-first search instead of breadth-first search? Why was depth-first search more viable than breadth-first search to solve this solution? Why am I even using a search algorithm to solve this solution? What the hell are search algorithms? If you know what search algorithms are and you know the different options, and when you are encountered or you are presented with a business problem or a user need, you're able to look at it and figure out, okay, what algorithms would solve this need, and then you just tell the AI to fucking write the code to do it. But those are still skills that require education. And that education, that knowledge is still very valuable. Perform technical tasks such as bug fixes, logic, UI wiring. That's also just kind of like writing code. Developers handle strategic decisions. They think about architecture, they think about design, they plan for the future. I have a buddy who just vibe coded a whole application, and then he got to the end of it and he was like, shit, I got no telemetry. And ChatGPT was like, oh, blah, 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 I need to be able to track my churn. And ChatGPT was like, well, you should have built telemetry into this. And he was like, ah, shit. And it took him weeks to reconstruct his entire code base to actually use telemetry. He didn't have to reconstruct everything, but he had to reconstruct a lot. Whereas if you're an experienced developer, if you've educated yourself, you're able to sit down, you know that you need telemetry right off the bat, and you know, okay, what things do we actually want to track? What metrics do we want to make? All these kinds of important details. Next, programmers are viewed as technical labor. They're code monkeys. You don't want to be a code monkey. Code monkeys don't make much money. Whereas developers are viewed as technical leadership. That means not only do you have to have good technical skills, but you also have to have good communication skills, be able to articulate yourself, be able to break down technical problems into ways that the business people in your company or on your team understand. You also need to be able to organize people, tell people do this, tell people do that, organize tasks, prioritize, all these other skills that come along with leadership. So not only do you need to know the technical, But you also need to maybe read some books like The Personal MBA, understand what business needs actually exist, because then you can figure out what kind of telemetry you're going to create, all of these things. Read some leadership books. These are all good skills to have. And code monkeys don't necessarily need those skills. Programmers, their median salary as of 2023 was $99,000, whereas developers had a median salary of $132,000. So as you can see, lead developers are much more highly valued than coders are. And then the job decline in programmers since 2023 to 2025 was 27.5%. So that's the whole the job market is fucked. All the developers are losing their jobs, especially the comp sci majors. And that's because a lot of comp sci majors just become programmers, not developers. However, if you look at the job decline of actual software engineers, developers, architects, they've only dropped about 0.3% since 2023. This is through the whole AI revolution. So you can see the job decline of programmers matches what we expect with the rise of AI, essentially doing the task of the programmer. But the developers are still around. So let's talk about the death of the junior developer. And you got this little guy, Mr. AI, killing the programmer. Not what you want. Well, if you're a programmer, it's not what you want. If you're AI, I guess that's cool. Or if you're an AI company, you're a huge fan of this. Whatever. Point is, AI does the programmer's job. Shore's algorithm. Boop, boop, boop. It pumps it out for you. We don't need no programmers who know how that works no more. Thus, we must go from being a code virgin to a lead developer. A code virgin is, exactly what it sounds like. It's somebody who's never freaking written code. They don't know nothing. You can't go from being a code virgin and then go and become a junior developer and then become a lead developer. That train has left the station, or that track is no longer viable and is not really something that you can do at this point. You kind of have to make this jump. And so we're going to talk about how you make that jump in the next video. But for now, you need to start to realize that ChatGPT is your team of programmers. Companies are no longer going to be hiring 6 comp sci majors out of college to sit there and write the code for the lead developer for them. The lead developer is going to architect a system and then use ChatGPT to write all the programs. Now, here's something that's interesting. The way that you use ChatGPT to do this is complicated. You need to understand how to communicate with an AI, how to pump out the code that you want. And we'll get into that more in a second. That's actually what we're getting into now. The AI accelerated developer knows how to utilize AI to 10x their productivity. So, look, if you just tell AI, listen here, stupid robot, I need a program that is going to find the optimal Amazon products based on this data, right? The optimal Amazon products to do affiliate marketing for based on this data. And then as my affiliate platform grows, you need to continually optimize the programs or the products that we grab. Okay, that's a problem that I ran into recently. You can't sit there and just say what I just said. You need to break it down and tell the AI, hey, Mr. Artificial Intelligence, you need to represent each product in the Amazon API database as a node. And here's all the information that we're going to put in there. And we're also going to store associated with each node these metrics. And then here are our success criteria, here is our failure criteria, and here's how we're going to structure the relationships between, or at least this is how Amazon's database structures the relationship between all of these different products, right? Where each product is a node and they have relationships with one another. Now let's create a database that stores the records of how we've traversed this database, and then let's choose between breadth first search and depth first search in order to try and find optimal products. And then you break it down even more and you say like, okay, here is a class, and this class is going to be responsible for storing that data in the database and fetching that data. Then here's another class. This class is responsible for searching and querying the Amazon product database and returning that data. And then here's another class that's going to be responsible for actually analyzing all this data and performing the search algorithms, and then communicating with that database service and this database service. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. The point is you have to be able to go more in depth on the technical components, describe how each technical component works, and then it's going to generate just that code for you. That's how you're going to be accelerated, but you're not going to be accelerated by asking it to solve the problem for you. We need the skills of a lead developer to know how to use AI. So essentially everything that I just laid out, understanding where you're going to store what data, how you want to structure that data, what algorithms you want to use in order to interact with that data, you need the skills of a lead developer to actually be able to communicate those things to the AI. The AI isn't going to figure those things out itself. Paradoxically, an AI can teach you all those skills, but it won't just think of those solutions right off the bat. This is why, like, I'm gonna go back here for a second. This is why a lot of times I'll talk to an AI, and before I go into the problem I actually want to solve, I explore the problem space a little bit more, and I tell it, look, I'm trying to optimize the products that I extract from the Amazon database. What do I need to what kind of like things do I need to learn before I can solve this problem? And what questions should I be asking myself? And be like, well, ask yourself, how is the data structured in the Amazon database? I'm like, oh, well, it's structured like this. And it's like, okay, well then now let's break it down and start talking about search algorithms and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, onwards. So what do lead developers actually need to know? They need to understand architecture and design patterns. Lead developers don't just write code, they build systems that scale, evolve, and are flexible to change. So if you're working on a web app, maybe you're using MVC, Model View Controller, or if you're working on a iOS iPhone app, you're using MVVM. These are, or maybe you're using microservices, or you're using a monolith architecture, all these things. These are different, when you're looking at architecture patterns, you're essentially looking at large-scale ways to structure your entire software, right? You need to know the different practices that are used, the different contexts that you use those in. Why do you use a monolith versus a versus microservices? You use a monolith versus microservices based on essentially where you are in the development path. Are you working on your MVP? Do you have a lot of code that needs to be separated into smaller components and easily interchanged? All these questions. So that's looking at the large-scale structure of some piece of software. Then design patterns are going to look at these smaller components that make up that software, and it's going to essentially help you understand certain recurring patterns and solutions to recurring problems of, okay, here's how you can build out specific components, and here's how these components can relate to one another. Then you can articulate these things to an AI, and the AI is going to generate code a lot faster because, again, you're speaking that developer language. Prompt engineering, in the age of AI, your ability to communicate with machines is as important as your ability to code. I feel like I've ranted about this quite a bit already, so I'll move right along. Business mindset. You don't build features, you create value. Lead developers understand how their code impacts users, revenue, and the company's value proposition. So this is why I would highly recommend read books like The Personal MBA, The Millionaire Fastlane. These books that teach you about value, about wealth, about money, about business development. Dude, look into some Alex Hormozy. It allows you to understand that business side and be able to either build your own business using software or communicate with the more business-oriented team members. And then also look at like software and understand how you're using that to solve business solutions and how you're going to build into your software. This is especially with like telemetry. You're going to build into it certain metrics and certain trackers to ensure that you're gathering the kind of data you need to satisfy business goals, to be able to say like, oh, these are the ways that our users are using this application, and these features aren't necessary, and these features are necessary. Um, Understanding where business and data intersect, very valuable skill, unbelievably valuable. Um, it's probably going to be one of the biggest money makers, and well, it already is one of the biggest money makers, but it will continue to be for a long time. Communication and networking. You are a part of a broader ecosystem, so you need to be able to operate within that. A developer with communication skills is a rare gift. Yes, this is very true. Many developers, they're little code monkeys, and they don't want to talk to nobody. If you can talk to people, if you can present yourself well, if you can listen, if you can have somebody tell you a bunch of things, and then you can repeat back to them what they've said in a way that they agree with, where they're like, that is what I said. Dude, you're killing it. You're set. You need to be able to ingest information, go get things done, come back, and communicate what's been done. And then networking is extremely important. We're kind of in an age where resumes and LinkedIn and all this bullshit, not a great way to try and get a job. Best way to get a job is to go to events, go to tech events, create a large network, meet lots of people, have little projects that you can show off, be excited about these things, and just kind of like be honest, like, dude, like I need a job, and you'll find a job. AI accelerated development. So what does AI accelerated development actually look like? Let's figure it out. Stop one, no more documentation hell. So here's the thing about artificial intelligence. It's essentially saved us from the hell that is the worst things in software engineering. AI has all this information in it. A huge part of the development process has always been finding new APIs, new tools, new resources, and sitting there and reading through tons and tons of documentation until you know how it works. Now with AI, you can just ask the AI, how does this work? And it'll be like, this is how it works. Here you go, get it done. That's very pleasant. No more wasted time on boilerplate code. Boilerplate code is basically like this kind of stuff at app.route/register methods, blah, blah, blah. More often than not, when you're writing code the old way before AI, you'd forget what this looks like. So every time you want to like set up an app route, you'd have to go look through old code that you've written or go back to the documentation and look at like, okay, this is how I set this up. And then, okay, now I can start working on my non-boilerplate logic. Now you can just have AI generate your boilerplate code, and frankly, it can generate most of that logic too. Effortlessly generate documentation. Once you have a bunch of code written, just tell the AI, hey, generate some concise documentation that explains how this works. That's extremely useful, A, for yourself, and B, so that future AI uses are easily brought up to date on what your code already looks like. You don't have to copy and paste it every time. You just put that documentation in there. Quickly solve stupid syntax and logic errors. It's a good debug buddy. You get quick unit tests for clear inputs and outputs. Unit tests are notoriously unpleasant to write, but fairly useful because, you know, you write code over here, you want to make sure it doesn't break your code over here, so you get your unit tests pumped out, just copy, paste, ChatGPT, make the unit test, bam, makes the unit test, bam, throw it into your code, run them, it works, we're good. Translate pseudocode into working code, and fast refactoring. And it's also very useful for suggesting tools, library solutions, and solutions you may not have known about. That's actually an extremely useful use case of AI, is saying like, I have this whole thing that I have to do, and it will be like, oh, there's already like this tool that does that, and you're like, oh shit, instead of sitting down and writing code for like 3 days to do this thing, you just find that tool instantly. It's very pleasant. The vibe coding trap. Your app vibe coding you. Pew, bam, blah. Why doesn't my app work? This is something that happened to me literally like 30 minutes ago. I vibe coded an application. I was like, motherfucker, this doesn't work. And it's like, why not? Well, because I vibe coded it. Now it actually had its utility. It got very far. It did a lot of good. I was like, hey, this is very nice. but I am going to have to kind of break into the code base that it's generated and start kind of picking it apart one by one to actually build an app that really works. So here's the difference between vibe coding and AI accelerated development, as I like to call it. Vibe coding, you're basically just saying like, hey, Mr. Robot, make me an app that does this. And you're not getting into the technical details. That can work for prototyping if you get lucky. It's kind of like gambling. And if you're doing that, it's worth noting that your competitive edge is significantly decreased, because if you can make something within a weekend, that means somebody else can make the same thing within a weekend, especially if you're making that thing from a place of no skills. On the other hand, if you do AI accelerated development, instead of sitting there telling the AI what you want done, you tell it what you want done and how you want it done. Then it's going to go and just make it happen. That how is super important. That how is the architecture and the design patterns. That how is saying, here is each component of our system, here are the inputs and the outputs of each component, and here are the other components this component has to relate to and the dynamics of those relationships, and here's how it should operate internally. Once you've done all that, you could sit down and write that code yourself, right? Like, you should be at that level where you could sit down and write that code yourself in order to avoid that vibe coding trap. But it's very nice to, not have to sit down and write that code yourself, because you can chop the amount of time you spend working on whatever by like a tenth of the amount of time. So it's nice to have AI be able to do that, but you do have to get it that close in order to really just start cranking out high quality code. So let's see what we're looking at. Why do I need to learn code? You need to learn to code because you need to not fall into the vibe coding trap where you're just like hands off gambling that the AI will generate something good. Look at all the monstrosities that have been generated with pure AI. Ask yourself, who has more value? The person who vibe coded an app in a weekend, or the person who designed a system that uses knowledge and understanding to put together and then generated that in a weekend after, maybe 2 weeks of work prior to that? That's a much more powerful set of value. And the barrier of entry to create that value is not just having access to AI, it's having the knowledge to build a robust system and then plugging that into AI. And that knowledge to build the robust system is something that's really going to set you apart and give you a competitive edge. Why do you need to know how to code? We've just talked about this. Not scalable. Vibe coded applications are not scalable. They're very expensive to continuously update. They always use monolith architecture. I'm talking about using things like Replete, Base 64, Base 44, all that kind of stuff. Very bad for scalability. We've talked about AI accelerated versus vibe coding. Same shit, different toilet. I don't know why that's there. I have no idea what that means. Tool, not a crutch. Make sure you are using AI as a tool, not a crutch. If you're dependent on the AI to generate your code, then you're going to run into problematic situations. A, poor differentiation / bad competitive edge. B, you're not going to be able to solve problems when the AI can't solve it for you. And then C is you're not bringing any value to the table, which means that you're not worth anything. The AI is worth something. And that's a problematic situation to be in. However, if you are able to use it as a tool and you are not using it as a crutch, you have real developer skills, then you're going to stand out. Anyway, that is my chit chat with you today. In conclusion, developer skills necessary, coding skills. You don't need to memorize all these algorithms. You don't need to worry about that too much. What you need to understand is system design. What you need to understand is communication, is business. If you understand these things, you'll do very well. You'll be able to get the AI to do what you want it to do, and you'll make money. People will hire you, or you can start your own business. Whatever the hell floats your boat. In the next video, we're going to look at what it actually looks like to educate yourself and what those actual skills are that you need to learn. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a good day. Farewell.